Sounds surprised. Okay, good morning. We are starting Shin Mem Hey again today. I just want to take 1 minute for yesterday. Just want to point out that a couple of things. We spoke about tefillin. Should be done every day. So just to be fair, the Orach Chaim, Yaakov Joseph quotes him. He says tefillin should not be put on the day that you pick Shabbos. And not to say bracha because of any of the 7 days, or for him it's 6 days, b'zusafek brachas lahaka. It's the opinion of the Orach Chaim. And it's also just want to point out, it's for this and for other things, this is not a machloket Sfardim and Ashkenazim. Generally, I mean, sometimes it comes out like that sort of, b'yamenu, but in general, unless it's the Maran versus Poskei Ashkenaz, or that's been the custom for generations. Otherwise, there's, many times you can have a machloket and it happens to be Rav Avadia versus Rav Moshe. But that has nothing to do with Sephardic Ashkenazic. Just get that out there. The Aruch Shulchan says that on Shabbos, on that case, when you don't know, you lose track, you don't know what day it is. So he says, every day you have to worry about it, because you don't say rov with choser yediyah, lack of knowledge, which we'll get to later, and you don't say rov with days. It's not a mixture. It's not every day by itself has its own kviyas. So I'm going to say that. And we mentioned, I think afterwards, that when it comes to food, so probably if once you have enough food to eat, you can't cook anything else. But perhaps you can probably do things on a level of derabanan. That was the psak of the Mishnah Berurah. Then Orach Shulchan argues you can't even do Isur derabanan. But the Magen Avraham and many Shulchan Aruch Harav, they all say you can do Isur derabanan on all 6 and perhaps even the 7th day. So make your orange juice by squeezing out orange juice. Make your grape juice for Kiddush by squeezing out with the shinoi. So that's that. And so I did say it's not so likely to apply to us unless we end up on Gilligan's Island. However, it may apply nowadays very commonly if you end up going to somewhere where it's a machloket beyond the national dateline, like Hawaii, Japan, even Australia, any of these areas that are considered a question. So then find out the psak. Do you pick one day 100%, or you might have a second day that you have to keep at least Yisuri Dera, not to do Yisuri Deraisa, etc. So it could actually, this whole siman could be very relevant. Okay, now let's do Shin Mem Hey. We're going to read Aleph again, just the bold part. It takes a second. Arba Aleph, Arba Rishios L'Shabbos, 4 domains to keep in mind: Rishus HaYachid, Rishus HaRabim, Carmelis, and Mekom Ketur. So those are the 4. Again, 3 are deraisa, the Carmelit is derabanan, and yesterday we discussed how we got to the name Carmelit, where that came from. Okay, that we won't repeat. And just wanted to point out, with all sugyas, when you see arba, that generally means amos. If you see arba'ah, that generally means tfachim, because sometimes it gets very confusing. So just keep in, if it has the extra hey, then you know if we're talking about amos or tfachim. Okay, so let's read. Bet. Let's first do Rishus HaYachid. Ezehu Rishus HaYachid. So, Makom HaMukaf Mechitzos Kavos Asara Tfachim V'yesh Bo Arba Tfachim Al Arba Tfachim O Yoter. So, extremely important to get these definitions. Well, especially Rishus HaYachid. What is that? You have to have walls. Now, the walls must be 10 high. Again, we're going to see, you could also count going underground if there's a hole or you have a ditch. But bottom line, from the bottom of the hole or bottom of where you're standing, you have to have, the walls must be 10 tfachim high, and the area must be a full 4 by 4. The area inside, the open area, the open space within the walls are not included. The space inside must be 4 by 4. Important. The walls are not included. Mishnah Berurah points out there's a little bit of a question, but bottom line, it's not included. The space itself must be 4 by 4, and it's not. And if one area is just 2 tefachim wide, you can't just make The other dimension, much longer. It has to be a solid square of 4 by 4. So what is 4 by 4 is square would be 16, right? So if it's 2 by 8, it's still not a Rishus HaYachid. It must be 4 by 4. Okay. V'chein charitz, that's what we said. If you have a ditch that's amok, so you dig out a huge area, or it could even end up being half below and half above, but v'chein charitz amok asara v'rachav arba'a arba'a, that's also going to be Rishus HaYachid. V'chein tel gavoa asara v'rachav arba'a al arba'a. So too, if you have a mountain, a hill, an area where on the area above, you end up having walls above the land around you, and you see the slope we're going to get to. We'll say it in a second. But let's say you have a little mound, and on the top of the mound, the flat portion is 4 by 4, and going upwards on the slope can be considered the wall of 10. In other words, that has to be a wall of 10, and you can create a wall of 10. It's called a tel mitlaket. It's quoted here in Mishnah Berurah too, but it's basically for every, I don't have the exact degrees, someone can tell me later, I can look it up, but basically, and I forget what the degree is, but it's for every 4 amos, or 24 tfachim, for every 4 amos going horizontally, you go up 10 tfachim. And if the slope is that degree or more, so then that's called a wall. And the wall starts at, once you reach 10 tfachim high. Okay. Yesh omrim deba'inan be'elu arba'a hen v'alachson. Now, there is an opinion that when we say 4 by 4, and normally we just say, and that is the halacha, we just say it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. And that is what it is. The Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah just points out an opinion, not the halacha, that it might be 5.6 by 5.6 tfachim. We always say 4 by 4. But why do you have, but really, Lamaisa, it's always only 5.6 by 5.6. That's according to this Yesh Omrim that we don't paskin like. How do you get to 5.6 or 5 3/5? Because it goes by the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse we know is 1 2/5 or 1.4. If you have a box of 1 by 1, and the hypotenuse is by definition always 1.4. So if the sides have to be what we say halachically 4 by 4, so 4 multiplied by 1.4 that's how you get to 5.6. Okay. Let's see.
It's be a circle with a diameter.
We'll get to the circle situation, but you always have to have in your space, very simply, 4 by 4. Bring with you a piece of paper that's 4 by 4, a poster, you cut it to 4 by 4, you always have to have 4 by 4. It will be in your space. And then that works.
The square with the hypotenuse on both ways, what's the point of saying with the hypotenuse?
So I'll discuss that with you afterwards maybe, but you don't need to have a hypotenuse is what I'm trying to say. The halachically, you don't have to have a hypotenuse. When the Ramah says it, he says, with the hypotenuse, it becomes the shear, the halacha, of what is 4 by 4. If I'm not explaining myself well, then we'll do it again afterwards, sorry. Let's see. It does come up later, la halacha, about carrying. When we say 4 by a person, for carrying Dalet Amos, we will see later that it means 5.6, which is an interesting halacha. Many say that's only on a din d'oraisa. So we'll get to that when we get to that. But there is such a concept. It's in the Gemara, it's in the Shulchan Aruch as well later on. But for this halacha of Rishus HaYachid, it's always 4 by 4, no question. Ignore the hypotenuse. 4 by 4, and that's always what it is.
Square, not around.
Always square. Always square. Okay. Yeah. Most of the poskim, including the many of the Ashkenazi poskim, pretty much all of them, I think, including the Gra and others, they just wipe away this thing in the Ramah is not lahalacha. So let's not get confused. Fine. Gimel. Kitalim hamakifim rishus hayachid. Now the walls that surround the rishus hayachid, al gabein rishus hayachid afilu einam rechavim arba'a. Okay. So now, anytime you have a rishus hayachid, by definition, it's created because you have walls of 10 tfachim or higher. On top of the walls, that also has a din of rishus hayachid. We'll see a practical example in a moment. Basically, if you're in a rishus harabim and you throw something or put it on top of that wall, you just did, you violated hotzah, daraisa. Even though you didn't put it inside the airspace of the rishus hayachid, you put it on the wall of the rishus hayachid. Okay. Dalet. Chorim shebekotlei rishus hayachid sheklape rishus hayachid heim rishus hayachid. If you have a hole in the wall, so you have two scenarios. You have let's say you have a thick brick wall, right? It's easier to conceptualize. You have a thick brick wall around and four walls. Inside the four walls, you have space. Now, if there is a carve out in one of the bricks, like a little shelf, kind of, and if it's from the inside of the rishus hayachid, anything you put inside that carve out is still rishus hayachid. And it's a little bit obvious if it's not if it's just a little carve out, even on top of the wall, it's rishus hayachid, we said. What happens if you have the entire brick missing and you have a complete airspace from the inside of the rishus hayachid going to the outside, and you can wave and see people into the rishus harabim? What is that? So here also, it also has a din of rishus hayachid. We'll see something. Right, so that has a din of rishus hayachid. We'll see a caveat. Now, in order for this, Mishnah Berurah quotes a machloket rishonim. Let's say we're missing, the example was you're missing a brick. You have a brick wall, and you're missing one brick. So there is an opinion that since one side is rishus harabim and one side is rishus hayachid, and if you're outside the house, and you put something from the rishus harabim into this hole, this wall, this missing brick, there's an opinion that says you only violate hotzah, deraisa, that it's going inside the rishus hayachid, if that brick wall is 4 by 4 wide. But other Rishonim, I think the most, but other Rishonim say even a mashahu, since it's part of the wall, anything in the wall has a din of rishus hayachid, since it's open to rishus hayachid. And the rishus hayachid is more powerful, like you have to pick which side, so rishus hayachid wins over rishus harabim. Okay, let's keep reading. V'im heim klape chutz v'einam ovrim klape panim nidonin v'fi govhan v'rochman. Now, if there's a carve out of the brick wall, it's not completely open. You don't have a missing brick. Just part of it's chiseled out, and it's solid, straight from the rishus hayachid. On the rishus harabim side, outside the house, it's a little bit of a carve out, and then so if you're standing rishus harabim and you want to take something from rishus harabim and put it in that little carve out, so then is that carve out a rishus harabim? So it depends. We have to finish reading the whole siman here, and then we'll see if it's called the Carmelis or if it's called the rishus harabim. It has its own parameters. Mishnah Berurah points out there's a little bit of discussion. It depends how high it is. If we said, let's say you have a brick completely missing, open space from rishus hayachid to rishus harabim. Right? You can wave right through, you see right through. If you put it, so it depends how high it is. Some say it could be rishus harabim if it's lower than 10, but he says Lamaisa, Mishnah Berurah's opinion based on the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avraham, it doesn't matter where it is, once you have a carve out there or a missing brick anywhere in the Rishus HaYachid, it has a din of, we say Rishus, Chorei Rishus HaYachid is like Rishus HaYachid. It has a din of Rishus HaYachid. Doesn't matter how high it is, it just mentions that the God just disagrees. It depends if it's below or above 10. Okay. Hey. Avir Rishus HaYachid hu Rishus HaYachid ad Arakia. The airspace of a Rishus HaYachid is a Rishus HaYachid until the heavenly spheres, the Shemayim. There's no end. So therefore, for example, let's say you have a very, very high wall. You have a normal Rishus HaYachid, but the wall goes up 100 meters. 100 feet, 100 meters, whatever it is. You're standing on Rishus HaRabim, and you throw something and it lands on the top of the wall. We learned the wall is Rishus HaYachid. So even though it's high up in the sky, we're going to see for other Rishiyos, sometimes it ends once you hit 10 Tfachim. But Rishus HaYachid, it goes up to Rakia. Mishnah Berurah says, for example, you have a pole, a thin pole, in the middle of your Rishus HaYachid, in the middle of your house, in the middle of a basketball court, or whatever it is, it's enclosed, it's Rishus HaYachid. If you throw something and it lands on the top of the pole, also, doesn't matter how many meters, it could be Empire State Building, doesn't matter how meters high, that's a Rishus HaYachid, and that's Hotzah Daraisa. The pole, because it's inside a Rishus HaYachid, that's why. Even though the walls are only 10 Tfachim high, and you landed on a pole that's within the enclosure, that goes way high. And you threw it from Rishus HaRabim. That's the case.
But L'Rakia is also into outer space, no?
I don't know. Ask the astronauts. Vav. Afilu. Okay.
Over the airspace.
Okay, I don't know. Vav. Afilu kli. We can analyze your exact example afterwards. Afilu kli kegon teva o migdal o kaveret. Now, any kind of a kli that you have, any movable object, any cabinets, anything you can, a car, anything that's movable, and it's outside. Well, yeah, it's not indoors, obviously. So then, we're talking about a case when it's outdoors, even if it has to be a movable object, even in a Rishus HaRabim we're talking about. Im yesh l'rabeya bo arba. You have to have airspace of 4 by 4 wide, right? It has to be, again, it has to be a solid 4 by a solid 4. V'hu gavoa asara, and it's 10 tfachim high. Havei Rishus HaYachid. It becomes a Rishus HaYachid. Now, this is going to be important when it comes to make it in Erev. It doesn't matter if the strings are over it, not over it, so that comes up later. So it's important just to know, you have any item in Rishus HaRabim that's 4 by 4, 10 high, that has a din of a Rishus HaYachid. But suppose the difference is between being a Carmelite and Rishus HaRabim. I think that's when it comes out more. Yeah. You're right. If it's attached to the ground, it would still have a din of Rishus HaYachid. If it's movable or not movable, that makes a difference for being a Carmelite versus a Rishus HaRabim. That's correct. Okay, very good. So, correction. For Rishus HaYachid, like you said, it makes no difference if it's attached or not attached. But for being a Carmelist versus a Rishus HaRabim, then it makes a difference if it's attached. Carmelite cannot. There is no din of a Carmelist, the Mishnah Berurah points out, but Carmelist by din of Kalim. So then, if it's attached, then you can come on to it. Is it a Carmelite or is it Rishus HaRabim? Okay, very good. Zayin. Okay, we'll start. Ezehu Rishus HaRabim. We'll start. Okay, what is Rishus HaRabim? Rechovot ushvakim harachavim sheish esrei ama ve'enam mekarim ve'en lehem choma. So, for starters, you have any main road in a city or between cities. And it could be a marketplace, but the point is people travel there and people travel there. People walk there, people cross there. In order for it to be Rishus HaRabim, though, it also must be a minimum of 16 amos wide. If it's less than 16 amos wide, it cannot be a Rishus Harabim. We're going to see there are exceptions, but generally speaking, the most of it, the main part of it, must be 16 amos, and it has to be where it's uncovered. It's not. If there's a ceiling, then it can't be Rishus Harabim. And if it doesn't have walls, if it's enclosed with 4 walls, then it's a Rishus. If it's enclosed with 4 walls, it has a din of a Rishus Harabim. 4 walls have a din of a Rishus Hayachid, 100%. If it just has an aside, even if it has 3 walls. So that's a machlokas rishonim, but general halacha is it's considered a Rishus Hayachid, D'araisa, but midarabanan, you have to get some kind of a 4th wall. Okay? But even if there is a wall, but if you have, where it's, again, this is a big discussion, we're not going to get into it, what is a relatively straight path from one end to another, how much can it bend or turn or curve, so to keep it a Rishus Harabim, that's a discussion, but it generally has to go from one end to the other, more or less an easy route, or straight, more or less. V'ein daltos neuros balayla, and it has to be where the doors don't get locked at night. Then have Rishus Harabim. Then it's Rishus Harabim. But if it's totally bent, if it's has doors and walls and it gets locked, it can't be Rishus Harabim. Okay. V'yesh omrim. Now there's an important clause. So that's the main. We're going to see that this is basically, for the most part, that's the Mishnah Berurah's opinion. We go like we just read Stam, Shulchan Aruch. That's the general Lechatchila opinion by Sfardim. By Ashkenazim, it's a little bit different opinions. V'yesh omrim, shekol she'ein shishim ribo ovrim bo b'chol yom, eino Rishus Harabim. And the second, there is an opinion over here, it's not a Das Yachid, that you must have you must have at least 600,000, again, it's a question if it's men or women and children, at least 600,000 people who are passing by the road every day, then it could be Rishus Harabim. If you don't have 600,000 people traveling, it cannot be Rishus Harabim. Mishnah Berurah points out, and I believe Rav Moshe says the same, that it doesn't go by actually traveling, you have to just be living there. It's a machloket. Many Ashkenazi poskim say, the road has to actually be used and traveled for 600,000. Mishnah Berurah points out, I haven't seen anywhere in the Rishonim anything like that. Where does it come from? So he says that's why Lamaisa you should the stam we should generally go with, and the fact that it goes by the city. So I think different opinions. We won't get into all the different opinions, but by Ashkenazim it's a little bit split. If there's at least 600,000 in the city, you did 24 by 10 exactly. So let me write that down.
It's the arctangent of 10 by 24.
Where is that? What's the what is it? 22.62 degrees. 22.